Good, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a second here. All right, cool. I've got my screen all straightened out, so let's jump in. I know we've got a jam-packed agenda today, so I don't want to waste any time. My name is John Balf. I'm a senior manager on the Buildings and Community Solutions team here at NEEP. I'm excited to be doing this webinar for everybody and participating in it, learning a lot about communities and federal funding opportunities. That's really our focus here today. Just a few things to note before we dive in. The webinar is being recorded today, and we'll share the slides as well as the recording afterwards with folks. We've got a number of folks that are interested in seeing the recording, so we'll be sure to get that out soon. Closed captioning is available if you would like to enable or disable that. The features on the bottom lower right-hand corner of your Zoom window. We're going to be doing questions towards the end of our speakers' presentations today. So please keep your questions coming into the chat box throughout the duration of the program here today, and know that we will get to them. We're not missing any. We're gonna just cover them at the end. Yeah, so keep the questions coming. Everyone's on mute. I think those are all the items I wanted to get through there. Up next, just wanted to give a shout out to our allies network, as well as our funders and our state partners. All of these folks listed on these slides here, are very supportive of our work. We love collaborating with you all on these programs, our webinars, as well as our other projects that we're working on. And yeah, appreciate you collaborating with us on this decarbonization journey and for helping us keep the lights on at NEEP. So thank you all very much. We've got a few upcoming events happening over the next few months. One in particular that I'm very excited about, and I think is very pertinent for this audience here today, is the first one on the left-hand side, the Decarbonizing Communities and Campuses event that we're hosting in conjunction with our partners at Power Options. So this is going to be taking place in May on the 3rd at the College of Holy Cross in Massachusetts. So we're really excited about that one, and we'll be diving into, we have a few different tracks for this event. One is specifically focused on communities, so it's a great opportunity to get folks in the room together, discussing some of the topics that we'll be discussing today, but also hearing from case studies and other experts beyond just the NEEP team, folks that are on the ground doing this work. So please join us for that. Registration is limited. It's available now. Take a look at our website, and I think in the link that Destiny just shared as well. Other than that, we've got the NEEP Summit in June, which we're really excited about, New Haven, Connecticut, and then the Heating Electrification Workshop a bit later in the year. So for today's agenda, here's what we'll cover. We're going to do a deep dive into federal funding opportunities for communities. I'll start by giving a little background on the current landscape of things. Then we'll dive into the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And then we'll hear from Ross in Maine on how states are supporting communities and what the state of Maine is doing to ensure cities and towns across their state are informed and proactive in some of this work. And then, like I said, we'll wrap up with some open discussion towards the end. So that's the game plan for our session here today. And on the next slide, just diving right in, one of the key things that we've heard a lot about from folks is just the fact that there's so much information out there. There's a lot happening in kind of this federal funding landscape, and particularly for communities where there's not a lot of bandwidth or some expertise in some situations where communities are pursuing these opportunities for the first time. It's a challenge to sort through this information, to understand what you need to be doing right now, and to get prepared for these opportunities. So that's one of the things that we're going to be trying to focus on today, is really breaking things down, focusing in on what needs to happen here today. And I want to give a shout out to Bernie Pelletier for kind of helping me string this thought process together with our Ready, Set, Scale webinar series. And just to the folks in Connecticut at PACE and the Connecticut Energy Network for providing a lot of input for this webinar here today. So like I said, so much going on. We want to make sure folks are ready, that they're in that ready position, taking the first steps that they can today. Then we want to get folks prepared to set and prepared to actually put together proposals and understand what types of projects are eligible, who they need to be collaborating with. And lastly, we want to focus on scaling up all these initiatives. So we'll be talking more about how states can partner with communities and how other organizations can be partnering with communities as well. So that's kind of the Ready, Set, Scale theme that we've got going on here today. On the next slide, these are some of the key first steps that folks need to be thinking about. And it seems, really simple and really basic when you put it out here like this. But I know folks are, bogged down with all the other different elements of these programs. So we're going to focus on two key programs today. That one being the DOE's Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, EECBG, and then is the EPA's lead organizations must have an active registration within the System for Award Management, sam.gov. This is the official website for doing business with the US government. It's important to note that folks have reported this is taking a long time to get approval within the system. So do this today. It could take several weeks. You don't want that to hamper any other deadlines that you need to meet as a part of these programs. So get logged in there, get your unique entity identifier, which is a key number that you'll use on probably many of these types of applications. Regarding applications for the CPRG, which we'll get into here shortly, that will go through grants.gov, and then EECBG applicants will use a combination of both FedConnect and Page systems. So there's a lot of kind of different systems that the federal government utilizes for different purposes. And I just want to make folks aware of these systems, and put an emphasis on the fact that get in there, register on sam.gov, and get that process started here. Next, we will dive a little bit more into the EECBG funding. So like I said, that's one of the two programs we'll be talking about today. There's $430 million available to state, local governments, and tribal governments through formula and competitive grants. These funds can be used for a pretty broad set of projects at the local level, which is kind of the focus of today's webinar, from developing energy plans and setting energy goals, to hiring consultants to assist with this effort, to conducting building energy audits, to establishing financial incentive programs for energy efficiency and decarbonization. These are all eligible activities, and probably worthwhile activities for folks to be looking into and exploring for their EECBG funds. Folks that are in cities with populations greater than 35,000, or that are within the top 10 most populous cities in their state, are automatically eligible for this funding. And if you haven't checked out the list of funding from DOE, they've broken that out on their website. You can find that pretty easily, and we can also share some information on that afterwards if you're not sure if you're eligible for formula funding or not. So there's a couple of different pathways that folks can take to access these grants. One of the first things that you'll need to decide as a community is whether you want to kind of go the more traditional grant route or the newer voucher route. Vouchers are something new to this program this year, and it's supposed to be a little bit less burdensome for the communities that are participating in that program. It's aimed at being used for technical assistance or for equipment rebates in particular. and it's really, again, aimed to reduce the administrative burden. So if you're a smaller community that can kind of foresee some of the challenges with managing federal grants, the voucher program might be the way to go for you. And actually, it's recommended that for any entities that are receiving less than $250,000, which I think is a good chunk of the communities within the NEEP region, at least, those are recommended that you go the voucher route. So definitely encourage folks to take a look at the key decision point there between going with the grant and the voucher route. So next, still on this slide, but next on in terms of steps that you have to take, all entities that are going to be receiving funds from the ECBG will have to submit a energy efficiency and conservation strategy. So this is something that you can either put forth with your application, or it can be submitted up to a year after receiving the award. So it's not something that you necessarily have to do right away, but it is something that DOE will require within 1 year of the award starting. So that's good to just keep in mind that you're going to have to put together this strategy at one point or another. DOE has outlined some pretty specific guidelines for what needs to be included in that energy efficiency and conservation strategy. So that should be, fairly nicely laid out for you, but make sure you're taking a look at that and understand, what needs to happen either at the time of application or within 1 year. Again, just to stress that point. And the last thing to mention here is that all entities applying for funding through EECBG, whether that's through the voucher or through the grants route, you'll need to complete a pre-award information sheet, which is available on the DOE Application Hub site right now. That's due by April 28th. And there's specific sections for folks going through the voucher or through the full grant, the voucher being a little bit lighter of a lift for the pre-application, but just make note of that either route that you're taking, you will have to submit the pre-award information sheet. So that's kind of the background on the EECBG and first steps that folks should be, kind of talking through with their, key decision makers right now. On the next slide, I'll getting into folks that are not eligible for formula funding. This information is in the works. These funds are not accessible at this time, so maybe just info for the future, I guess, that I'm sharing here. Some of the funds that are going to be allocated to states through formula grants are then going to trickle down to communities. So about 60% of the funds that states receive through this program are in the future going to be made available to communities that are, most likely ineligible for formula funding. So that's likely not going to occur this year, maybe early 2024, but just to make the communities aware that there will be some opportunities to work with your states on EECBG funding in the future. And then lastly, outside of the formula and outside of the state funding, there is competitive funding available, a small amount of competitive funding available, and that information again will be released, I think, later this year as well. So that's one kind of big focus area I know for communities, the ECBG. We'll get into another one in a moment here from the EPA, but I just wanted to put two other things on folks' radar. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I know this is important content to get out there. First is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a large chunk of money, $27 billion to states, communities, tribes, and nonprofits. That money will flow to those entities and then be available and dispersed to others for direct projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a little bit of a different kind of pathway to funding projects. But again, this program is not available now. More information will be available coming early summer 2023, so in the next few months. And then the last one I'll mention is the environmental and climate justice block grants. there's a few different kind of sub-award or sub-programs under this funding. It's largely, I think, maybe solely based for community-based nonprofits. There's an RFI right now that's due on April 10th. So that's another one to just make folks aware of, but certainly not meant to, I think some of your key first steps should be occurring in the EECBG as well as the climate pollution reduction grant that we'll get into here momentarily. So with that, on the next slide, I believe we've got a poll question. Yeah. So I'm curious how folks are sorting through and getting their information regarding federal funding opportunities. There's a lot out there. There's info coming from the federal government, of course, through state governments, through nonprofits or other industry groups, and then other options. Folks may also be uncertain of where they're getting their info. So I'm curious where folks are going for their info. Looks like we've got a pretty good split right now between the federal government and nonprofits, with state governments not too far behind. And looks like we're sharing those results. So thank you for that. It's good info for us to be aware of, particularly as it pertains to my next slide here, which is around an opportunity to get more involved on NEEP's work on this effort around federal funding. So we're putting together a group right now, our federal funding working group, that is really tailored to communities to continue kind of this conversation that we're having here today, and make sure that folks are aware of deadlines and next steps that they should be taking with regard to both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Acts. We want to provide tips about proposals, share some ideas on project concepts as well. I can see a forum where we're pulling folks together and having group meetings to do some thinking around these concepts. We'll pull in topical experts as well. And then this will help inform the development of materials. So if that's a group that you're interested in staying in the loop in, you can just lurk on our email list with our communities as much as we can. So with that, I believe that is all the slides on my end, and we will now introduce Andrea Denny from the EPA to talk some more about one of the grants I mentioned, one exciting opportunity, and some key near-term information that folks need to know. So Andrea, I'll pass things over to you.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks everyone for inviting me to be here. We can go on to the first slide. So that's me. I'm with the State and Local Climate and Energy Program at EPA in the Office of Air and Radiation. And I am one of a large group of people that's been working on putting together the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, or CPRG grants. And today we're going to be talking about the planning grant portion of that program. Next slide. So the CPRG program is divided into two phases. So the first one, as I just said, is the planning grant. So that's $250 million for non-competitive cooperative agreements. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, because that is the part that is out for applications. Later this year, we're going to be announcing the competition for the implementation grant program. That is where the big part of the money is. So that's going to be $4.6 billion. But those competitive implementation grants are really tied to the planning grants. The way the statute is written, they are grants to implement plans developed through the planning grant. So while the planning grants are much smaller, they are a critical piece to getting those implementation grants. Next slide. So I just want to start with a kind of very high level summary of how that money is being allocated. So all states, and we're including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico in that, can get up to $3 million per state. And as I said, it's non-competitive, so they just need to come in with their budget and work plan to receive that funding. We then have $67 million set aside for municipalities and local governments. And the way we're doing this is a little bit different than how EPA typically does grants in that we're not assigning those to a specific municipality. They are for metropolitan areas, and we're using metropolitan statistical area populations to come up with that list of the 67 most populous metropolitan areas in the country and assign or allocate funding based on that. And I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. We also have $25 million for tribes, as well as $2 million for the other US territories, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Next slide. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the planning grant application process. While these are non-competitive grants, we're the federal government. We still like paperwork and forms. So there is still an application process you have to go through. Believe it or not, we don't just give out millions of dollars without knowing a little bit about how it's going to be used. So just need a little bit of information about how that money is going to be spent so that we know it's all for approved purposes. But basically, we announced the program on March 1st. We are asking that states give us a notice of intent to participate by the end of March. For metropolitan areas, they have until the end of April to give us that notice of intent to participate. And that's the same deadline, April 28th, for states to actually submit their application materials, so their budget and work plan. The metro areas have until the end of May to submit their application. Tribes and territories have a couple extra weeks to get that application in. And then we anticipate the awards will be made in summer of 2023. Next slide. So what do you actually have to do with that funding? So essentially, and things look a little bit different for tribes and territories, but focusing on states and metro areas, there are 3 deliverables. It's a 4-year grant. We expect 3 deliverables. The first piece and really critical is the priority climate action plan. It's a very quick turnaround. It's going to be due by March. And that is essentially the prerequisite for getting implementation funding. So this is identifying those near-term implementation ready priority measures that you're going to use to apply for your implementation grants. And so this deadline, while I said, we're going to announce the funding opportunity for the implementation grants later this year, it's going to have a long open period. We want to give it to you ahead of time, so you'll have a lot of time to familiarize yourself and use the criteria in developing the priority climate action plans, but the implementation grant will be due after the priority climate action plan is due. We then realized that you need a little more time to actually do a really thorough, comprehensive climate action plan, and we want these grants to support comprehensive climate action planning. So you have 2 years to put together that comprehensive climate action plan, and then you have another 2 years to kind of do additional planning work that you might be interested in. A lot of places like to do updates periodically, do an updated inventory, or kind of do an assessment of how are we doing, how are we progressing towards our targets. This gives you the latitude to hire people for 4 years and have 4 years to do kind of climate planning work. We are expecting a kind of status report at the end of the grant that just kind of lets us know where you are, what next steps are, and we're going to use that to inform future, hopefully at least future funding and technical assistance opportunities. Next slide. I wanted to touch a little bit on interagency and intergovernmental coordination. This is also a requirement that we've established in our program guidance. So in addition to the deliverables, you have to do that with this kind of interagency and intergovernmental coordination in mind. This is really important because we are only giving out 67 grants to metro areas. There's a lot of municipalities that aren't going to be directly covered by those grants. We are requiring states to collaborate with municipalities and any sub-state air pollution control agencies within the state and make sure that their interests and priorities are incorporated into that state pollution or state priority climate action plan. And those can then be used for implementation grants. So even if you didn't directly receive a planning grant, you may still be eligible for an implementation grant based on measures that are included in that state priority plan. And for metro areas, while there is one lead agency that gets a grant for a metro area, it's to develop a plan and coordinate with that whole metropolitan statistical area in mind. Next slide. So I just want to kind of walk through that. I've touched on this metropolitan area idea a couple of times, and I know it's kind of a new concept. So I want to walk through a really simplified example. So let's say we have a metropolitan statistical area that has 2 counties. Each county has 1 city and 1 town, and then there's an air pollution control agency that spans over the metropolitan statistical area. And that's one of the top 67 in the country. So what we would expect is that the mayors and the town supervisors and the county executives and the air directors, and I know, in different parts of the country, those might be different names, or counties might not have executives, but you get the idea. We would expect them all to meet, talk about how they could coordinate, what their roles might be, and in this example, they determine that the County B's Department of Environment is going to be the one to submit the notice of intent and actually receive the grant and kind of run it for the region. So they submit all the paperwork, they get the funding, and then they all work together, ideally, coordinate to develop this climate plan. And all of those entities, all the counties, both cities, both towns, and the air pollution control agencies participated in this process and are eligible to apply for implementation grants. They can apply jointly if they want to do a kind of coordinated project, or they could apply individually. Next slide. And then I just wanted to wrap up by kind of running through where we are right now. Hopefully this list is right of the NEEP jurisdictions. So I have the states, and the ones that are red are the ones that have already submitted a notice of intent to participate. And actually, I forgot DC. DC also submitted their notice of intent to participate. So all of the red areas have already submitted their notice of intent. We do expect a lot more to be coming in. We've heard from other states that they're just getting the governor's signature on things, and that can be a process. So we do expect more of these states will be turning red. And then I listed out in each state if they have one of the top 67 MSAs. I included it here. And then I also flagged a few that are not quite in the top 67, but are very close to the top 67. We are encouraging those communities to also submit a notice of intent to participate, because if someone above them on the list decides not to participate, or in some cases, if a state turns down funding, some of that money might mean more municipalities become eligible. So we are really encouraging places that are close to that 67 mark. And you've got a couple in the NEEP territory, that are 68 and 69, which should really strongly encourage submitting a notice of intent to participate. So I know I went through that really fast. I wanted to let you know we have a much longer recorded webinar on our website. It's if you someone may have dropped a link in the chat, or I will do that while Ross is talking, but you can watch that recording there. We also have a notice of intent list that we keep updated there, so you can see if your state has opted in or if your MSA has opted in. And I'm happy to answer questions when we get there. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yeah, we've got, I think, a number of questions, some interest from some folks in Connecticut, which I know we have listed on this slide here. But yeah, we'll keep the questions coming into the chat box, and we will get to those following our next presentation from Ross Anthony from the state of Maine. We'll be talking a bit about their work on federal funding and how they're trying to support communities. So Ross, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you so much, John. Next slide, please. Oh, I had an introduction slide, but that's fine. We'll start here. Well, I appreciate everyone attending today. So good morning to everyone. My name is Ross Anthony, and I am the Buildings and Energy Efficiency Analyst with the Maine Governor's Energy Office. So as states find themselves with unprecedented amounts of funding and opportunities from both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's becoming increasingly crucial to engage communities both early and often to ensure that these programs and funding opportunities are meeting community needs. So for today's discussion, I'm going to bifurcate my presentation into kind of two different portions. The majority of the conversation will be surrounding partnerships and resources and stakeholder engagements that we have been leveraging for reaching out and working with communities on these opportunities. And the last part, which will be a little bit shorter, will be a brief overview of how we have actually engaged with communities under specific programs. So kind of like examples of how all of this has come to fruition, at least so far. So beginning with this slide, what I would like to talk about is a partnership that is under the governor's office in Maine, and it is called the Community Resilience Partnership, or CRP. This is an initiative that was launched about 1 year ago to provide support to communities to take climate and energy action. The governor had originally set a goal for 100 communities in the first year, and we're now at 127 communities engaged in the program. Of those 127 participating communities, we see that 76 are fully enrolled, and 51 are communities that are working with service providers to enroll. Next slide, please. So as these maps demonstrate on the right, the climate plan identifies that many Maine communities lack planning capacity and resources to prepare for climate impacts. And many communities have high levels of social vulnerability that can make them more vulnerable to climate impacts, such as, a large percentage of low income or older residents. So the CRP, it was launched, as I mentioned, about a year ago. It was actually December 1st, 2021. And its core mission is to provide grants and assistance to communities in Maine to reduce carbon emission, transition to cleaner energy, and become more resilient. Regarding the resiliency, this is specifically about climate change effects such as extreme weather, flooding, rising sea levels, public health impacts, and more. And I did notice that there was a question in the chat regarding councils of governments. In Maine, our COGs are members of the Community Resilience Partnership and represent a multitude of different communities to ensure that they become enrolled. So I just wanted to drop that in from the perspective of Maine. Next slide, please. So this particular partnership has three different types of funding opportunities. The first is grants to communities for planning and implementation of climate and energy priorities. The second is grants to service provider organizations to help communities get started. And the third is pilot contracts with regional coordinators to support communities in the implementation and securing funding for these priority projects. So with so much federal funding available for infrastructure projects, this work is also helping to develop kind of a pipeline of local and regional projects so that we are ready as soon as funding opportunities emerge. You can see from the slide that we had $4.75 million in our biannual budget for local, tribal, and regional grants. And these are all to help those three topic areas that I had mentioned before: reducing carbon emission, transition to clean energy, and become more resilient. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about the Community Resilience Partnership, there is a link down below that you can take a look at and kind of see how the structure is set up and what we are doing with this particular partnership. And the reason that I bring this up is that we are leveraging this partnership for a variety of funding, which I will get to in that second portion of my presentation, which is going to be how we are engaging communities. It's essentially creating a network that we can tap into of all the communities in the state so that we have kind of a point of contact. We can listen to them, we can engage with them, hear what they need, and then look for opportunities based on that pipeline of local and regional projects to really kind of streamline everything that we are doing within the state of Maine. Next slide, please. So another thing to take into consideration is that the bipartisan infrastructure law includes a significant amount of investment in transportation, resilience and environmental protection, energy and energy efficiency, and broadband. These are a lot of different topic areas. And for communities, especially communities that may be resource constrained, it's really important to be able to disseminate this information in a very streamlined fashion so that they know exactly what is relevant to them and what they can apply for. Deborah, absolutely agree. Every state needs a CRP program. So we did stand up this website, and this website is intended to provide everyone with a quick view on the different programs and opportunities that may be available to their community and kind of what category it fits into. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned the topic areas: transportation, resilience, environment protection. You can see them all on the left side of the screen. This is really helping us navigate through all of the BIL investment categories. It's a way to really help communities narrow in on what they need to do. And then on the back end, we are looking at the pipeline of local and regional projects and saying, hey, opportunity A has been released and communities X, Y, and Z have this in their pipeline. Let's engage with them and get them connected and rolling on this opportunity. So, these are formulaic and competitive funds. More are becoming available every day, and we are working across state agencies to ensure that Maine is maximizing these federal dollars, not only at the state level, but also providing information to the communities about the opportunities that they are eligible for. We do also have a newsletter that comes along with this. It is at the bottom of the website. So if you happen to be a Mainer, feel free to go to this website and to engage with those newsletters so you can see everything that has been coming through our pipeline. Another thing that we did on the right side of the screen, you can see it's a map. This is a simple Power BI dashboard. I like to make the joke that the color scheme that we chose is rainbow sprinkles because there's quite a few different colors in this. But what's really interesting about this is when you go to this map and you hover over one of those circles, it explains what the project is, what kind of funding they received, what community it benefits, and a description of the project. So you can actually see what other communities in the state are doing. And sometimes that inspires a lot of ideas, especially those projects that are set up to be replicable and more generalized to apply to the various communities within the state. Next slide, please. So another thing that we have done is we have engaged with the Maine Municipal Association. We have a Governor's Infrastructure Implementation Committee, and between both of those entities, we have held a series of informational webinars on funding and program opportunities for Maine communities, specifically within the bipartisan infrastructure law. I will heavily assume that we will also be holding these for opportunities of the Inflation Reduction Act as they become available, whether it's at the program level or whether we are just simply explaining, stuff like the Homes and HERA program. Those are tailored more to the individual, but of course it's important for communities to be able to disseminate that information. So this series of webinars was a particular interest to officials from municipalities, counties, and tribal governments in Maine, as well as the staff from regional planning organization, from COGS, from local technical assistance groups. And you can kind of see the themes where we have those binned categories. I actually presented the one on energy programs and building efficiency funding. And it was just great to see so many communities, municipalities, counties, tribal leaders be in attendance at these webinars and engage and say, here's what we're thinking. Does this fit in? And, if it does, great. We plug them right into that program. And if it doesn't, we work with them to either find another program or think about how this program can fit their needs. I should note that recordings are available from the previous webinars. So if anyone has any interest in kind of seeing what Maine has done throughout these webinars, feel free to give those a listen. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of the other side of that bifurcated presentation that I was talking about. And I just want to just very briefly go over how we have engaged with some of the communities for some of these different opportunities that we have seen. So for grants for energy improvements at public school facilities, this is a particular program. It was a $500 million grant program spread across 4 years to make public schools more energy efficient. So they could do anything from building envelope, HVAC, lighting, controls, ventilation, renewable energy, a wide myriad of different opportunities. And within the Governor's Energy Office, as well as our sister office, which is called the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, we put our heads together to think about how this program can best serve communities, and our mind immediately went to education in unorganized territories. So for those who don't know, Maine is a very rural state. We have 50% of the land in New England, but less than 10% of the population. And these particular schools are in the most remote areas of our state. They serve critical infrastructure needs and providing education for the residents within that population. If these schools didn't exist, people had to drive, an hour to the next school. And so we worked with them to put together an application or a concept of a project. And our engagement with them was so intense to the point where we actually were helping them submit the materials. We weren't just a partner with them, we were in meetings and helping to advise them. So that's one thing that I would encourage states to do. The other is with the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. We've already had an overview of that. So I will just highlight what we have particularly done in this for this particular project. 60% of the funds we are currently looking at, it's not final, but we are currently looking at implementing this special round of funding through the Community Resilience Partnership that I had talked about. So leveraging that existing network to implement the 60% of funds that must be passed through to ineligible municipalities. And the 40% that the state would retain and use for purposes that would help better serve the state, we are looking to implement technical assistance for communities to utilize, and also for expanding capacity for a lead by example initiative. We have one of those at the state level, but we want to be able to provide technical assistance and support at the municipal level, again, directly benefiting the communities. I want to ensure that we leave enough time for questions, so I would just at a very high level also mention the building codes implementation and the workforce programs. These are programs that don't necessarily provide direct benefits to the communities, but what we are doing is engaging the contractors in this community to find ways to provide economic stimulus in the form of workforce development. And then with that expanded workforce, we're going to be able to implement a significantly larger number of energy efficiency and energy-based programs within those communities. Again, it's kind of the secondary effect. You know, it's intended for the workforce, but we're looking at the communities that will need it the most to kind of fill those needs. And I will conclude by saying that, you know, it was mentioned today, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is something that, you know, as we are learning more information, we are tailoring our outreach strategy accordingly. And that's one thing that I would always encourage states and different municipalities to do, is as information comes, to kind of tailor the way that you are communicating with communities to make sure that you're meeting the communities where they are at. And I see that John is back. John, I went 1 minute over. I am so sorry.
No, Ross, you did great. We won't hold you at that 1 minute against you. Thank you for keeping us on track here, and to Andrea as well. So great, we can take down the slides and invite Andrea, perfect, to join us back on screen here. So we've got some time for questions. I know there were a bunch coming in, Ross. A lot of kudos to Maine's approach on you know, helping coordinate with communities, which I think is you know, as you showed, really really valuable. It's a good coordinated effort there that, you know, I hope other states will take back and emulate in their own space there, because I know that level of coordination is very helpful. So let's see, I'm just taking a look at the list here. And Andrea, I feel like we got a couple kind of around the same topic about you know, how to coordinate with many communities, and you know, and I guess additionally in places that don't have counties necessarily. You know, what role is EPA kind of playing in that to get folks organized?
Yeah, and I took a quick look at the chat, so I will try to kind of answer a suite of those kind of related questions that came in. So so on the issue of counties, you know, some parts of the country have counties, and some parts have strong counties, and some parts don't have counties or have weak counties. So it's very flexible. There is no need for a county to be involved in any of this. You know, MSAs and also in New England, they call them like NECDAs. They're like slightly different, but they're still kind of operate on the same principle. It's essentially it's a collection of municipalities that are going to be covered within that geographic area. So whatever that assortment of municipalities is, like, that's who we want the coordination to happen with. So if that includes counties, great. If it doesn't include counties, still great. If you have a council of governments or a regional planning commission, or, you know, an entity like that overlays that MSA, and it doesn't have to be an exact, you know, boundary match, those could also be eligible entities. There's a couple provisions, you know, around that. They have to be able to get a federal grant. They have to be you know, they have to be reporting back to municipalities. Like, so for example, a lot of COGs, their board is made up of the municipalities that are, you know, in that COG. That would be likely an eligible entity. So those are the kinds of groups that could coordinate and help out with this. One other thing I should note is that while we need one lead agency to take the grant, they can do subawards. So, you know, if there's a university or a community group or something like that that could help with that coordination piece, that's totally allowed. That's a, you know, allowed use of funds, and we want this to make sense for that particular area. And we know every kind of regional group is a little bit different. So that's why we didn't say this is your lead agency. We wanted it to be a little bit more organic and to be flexible and work for people. So I'm going to stop there. You can ask me more questions. Hopefully that covered at least some of them.
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the big things folks should be doing is engaging with those regional planning agencies or commissions, those councils of government, and, having those conversations with them right now to see who's taking the lead, how they can be involved, how they could be involved in, sub-recipient grants and things of that nature. It sounds like that's a good kind of step to be
Yes.
taking.
Exactly. And I should say, the list of notice of intent that we participate on our website, as we get those, we are listing the lead organization that submitted them. So you can see, if your state one has come in, you know who the state agency is going to be, to reach out to. As the MSA ones start coming in, those aren't due for another month, so we don't have any yet, but we will list the lead organization so you can make sure you're in the loop with them.
Yeah, good place to double check things. All right, thanks. All right, maybe one for Ross up next. So let's see. One thing that I was kind of curious about is how you are keeping information on that website so up to date. Things are changing regularly. Do you have staff members that are committed to that? And then what type of feedback have you gotten from communities on the usefulness of that information?
Great question. So I should note that I am an ex-consultant and economist by trade. So I have situated myself as the data nerd of the office. And we fortunately have a couple of data nerds in the office. And a lot of the information, a lot of the ways that we keep the information so up to date is we have utilized embedded Power BI dashboards. This allows us to update a simple Excel spreadsheet and do a couple of manipulations within the dashboard that might take moments. And then all we have to do is simply hit refresh, and all of that new information is imported and put onto the site. It allows us to keep things very dynamic and as up to date as possible. Of course, it is hard to keep up with everything, especially as new opportunities are coming. So we do have specific members and staff members within the Governor's Energy Office, as well as our sister office, which I had mentioned, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and Future. And these particular individuals are tracking every single program and determining, is it within our purview, yes or no? Who would it benefit? Who are the applicants? And from there, we want to engage as early as possible. We want to keep the work moving, because what we found is kind of this slow but steady pace has really benefited us. I think back to the end of January, where there were like 7 RFIs due in the same week, and that was just it was a fun time. It was a nightmare to navigate. And so if we kind of keep the work moving at a progressive state, if there's a program that comes out that says, full applications are due in June, well, we're going to try to meet with the communities as soon as possible and get the ball rolling on it. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good intel. We just got one around, and maybe this might touch on both you, Andrea and Ross, around a lot of these grants, seem to be more focused on planning, and curious if there are some that are talking about, funding equipment and infrastructure and upgrades in buildings. I can touch on the EECBG one. That's definitely, an allowable or eligible activity within that. There is planning. Planning is eligible, but there are also, upgrade projects that can be done. Some of those funds are maybe a bit smaller for wide scale adoption of these measures, but certainly, those funds that are going to communities can be used for that purpose. And then, yeah, Andrea or Ross, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Sure. So I can jump in. So yes, so the first phase is planning. So that's what that's why I was focused on planning, because that's the part of the grant that's out now. But that's 250 million. The $4.6 billion that is coming is all about implementation. So I can't say specifically what you can use it for, because we are still writing that part of it. So that guidance will be out later this year, and those are implementation grants. So those will be we want you to spend some time planning and figure out the best use of that funding, and then you can apply, and tell us why what you want to do is the best way to get greenhouse gas reductions and actually start getting those reductions.
All right. So be on the lookout for more info on the implementation portion of that program.
Yeah, and I can jump in a little bit. So the community resilience partnership that I had mentioned, I mentioned some of the core areas that it works in, but at a high level, an elevator pitch, one sentence from that would be that it's grants to help communities with grants. So we're trying to set them up so that they can take advantage of these community-based grants that will offer stuff like equipment and infrastructure. And we're also working with them directly and to kind of sign on where we can, provide letters of support where we can. But that's a big reason why we are utilizing the community resilience partnership is for something like the EECBG, it's crucial for some communities to develop and implement an energy efficiency and conservation strategy. That's the first eligible use on the EECBG program. But there's also 13 other eligible uses, anything from energy audits to funding energy efficiency equipment to nonprofit organizations and government agencies for energy efficiency retrofit. So there's so much that could be done with this. And one thing that we are stressing within the communities, because of course it is up to the communities to decide what they use these funds for. They have a formulaic allocation of funds that they will then apply for within those formulas. I think that was mentioned in the chat. I think Chase explained that wonderfully. But we want to make sure that these programs and what they're using the money for has a long-lasting impact. So from the perspective of, let's say, energy efficiency rebates versus energy audits, both are incredibly important and equally as valid. With the energy audit, the benefit that you get from it is a list, a menu of different projects that you could take on within your community or that particular building. And you have that in perpetuity. And from there, you can start to utilize the existing state infrastructure, your implementers, your housing authorities, what have you, to kind of deploy those funds and start to achieve what you get from those audits. Now, we fully expect that there will likely be some communities that take the path of enhanced incentives for stuff like energy efficiency upgrades or retrofits. But we want to make sure that we're working with the communities so that the impact is long lasting, well past the time that the funds from, say, the BIL or the IRA have run out, because they eventually will run out.
Yep, that's very smart. Thanks, Ross. The other one to I guess that I brought up earlier, the greenhouse gas reduction funds, those funds will be directed to states and communities who will then disperse that to specific projects. So I think that's an opportunity for implementation of a lot of these things, although, not all the information is out on that program. So we'll keep folks updated on that, but I think that's one where we can look into that implementation side a little bit more. All right, so just keeping an eye on the time in the chat here. We've got one kind of specifically about a town hall improvement project, and I think it was directed towards you, Andrea. I would imagine TBD on whether this will fall under the implementation category, and I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have anything I can say to that. I mean, it sounds like a great project, but we haven't worked out kind of what the parameters of the implementation grants will be quite yet.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. And then one for Ross, kind of back on the staffing and funding side of things for the governor's energy office there on, I guess specifically the the resilience partnership. Could you just talk a little bit about that, where the funds are coming from? How many of you are working on that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one core staff person within GOPIF, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and Future. Again, that's our sister office that we work with very closely, especially on climate and resiliency issues. So this one person it's their full-time job to oversee this partnership and to work on enrollments. But of course, it takes a village to raise a partnership. So there's a lot of times that, I will sit in on an RFP review, or someone else within the Governor's Energy Office will sit in on an RFP or a proposal review. And that's really where you start to see multiple staff members coming together. There are a lot of times that, a project will come across my desk that is focused on buildings and energy efficiency. And so I would help advise on that. And then at the same time, the community next door may be working on resiliency. So they may engage some more resilience focused staff members on this. So all that is to say that we have one person where it's their full-time job, and then they get support from the remainder of the office. In terms of the funding and where it came from a 4.75 million allocation in the 2022 to 2023 biennial budget. And that helps support, not only the staffing for this, but also to implement the grants. Again, as I mentioned, grants for grants. That is really helping communities stand up and develop plans and develop a pipeline of projects. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it is. Thank you, Ross. All right, I know we've got just a couple of more minutes left, and I've got a slide or two to get through. So I think we'll hold there. If folks listening have more questions, feel free to keep typing them in. This is meant to be kind of the start of this conversation. I mentioned the working group that we want to be pulling together at NEEP on federal funding, and having these conversations on a more ongoing basis. So feel free to share your information afterwards or in the chat, and we can make sure that you get linked up with that. I'll say goodbye and thank you to Ross and Andrea for both of your presentations and all the information that you shared with us today. Look forward to seeing how everything rolls out and engaging with you both in the future on this. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So just wanted to alert folks to a couple of other things that we have going on events-wise at NEEP. A lot of state funders and allies might be on the call here today. So we've got our next Allies and Funders webinar coming up in about a month, or just under a month, on April 20th at 11 a.m. So join us for that. And then we've got our next iteration, or next edition of the Ready, Set, Scale webinar series coming up, not next month, but in May. So we're taking April off, and we'll get back to folks with more information on this. We'll be covering that, at a high level. We know we're covering the topic of remote virtual inspections. So take a look at our website soon for more information on that. We'll be sure to share that out with folks that registered here today. All right, I think that is all of the slides and the content that we have today. So appreciate everybody joining. Thanks again to Ross and Andrea for their presentations today, sharing all this very valuable information to our communities. Look forward to engaging with folks more on this topic going forward, and hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Thanks again.